Support comes from Gemma, architects, planners, and designers seeking to bring joy to their clients and communities. Details at gemastl.com.
This is St. Louis on the Air from St. Louis Public Radio. I'm Elaine Cha. This week we're listening back to some of our favorite stories from 2025. Today's show is from March. We spent an entire hour exploring the dramatic rise and shocking departure of Missouri's Gentle Barn. I started that show by taking us back in time to the place where this story began, in a slaughterhouse. On March 30th, 2017, the St. Louis Six became icons. They were a group of cattle, and that morning, they were destined to become beef. Instead, they escaped a slaughterhouse in North St. Louis, running free, evading capture, showing off their sheer will to live. It took hours and no less than 18 police officers to capture the St. Louis Six that day and return them to the slaughterhouse. But they did not become meat. Instead of death, they were eventually saved, purchased in fact by animal activists, taken out of the slaughterhouse, and allowed to retire in a sanctuary built just for them. It was in Dittmer, Missouri, about an hour's drive from St. Louis, a place called Gentle Barn. Not all who escaped survived. One steer with dark-colored hair named Spirit was injured at some point in the escape or transport. Before he ever reached the Gentle Barn, the same people who had saved him from the slaughterhouse made the decision to euthanize him. Rescuing animals is complicated. It doesn't always end happily, but even with the death of Spirit, that's where this story seemed to stop, with the surviving St. Louis Six romping through fields, living alongside other rescued animals, and delighting the visitors to the Gentle Barn who arrived every Sunday to meet these celebrated escape artists. And that's the way it was for about 8 years. But a few months ago, in October 2024, the Gentle Barn announced the closure of its sanctuary in Dittmer. In a matter of days, the nonprofit moved the surviving members of the St. Louis Six, along with all of Gentle Barn's nearly 30 animals, to sanctuaries in Tennessee and California. St. Louis on the Air producer Danny Wicentowski has been looking into what happened after the closure of Missouri's Gentle Barn, and why 5 animals that once called Missouri home, including Eddie, a member of the St. Louis Six, have died since that move. Here's Danny.
6 years ago, on a sunny day in March, I was on the trail of the St. Louis Six. It was nearly the 2nd anniversary of the escape, and I was tracking down witnesses to interview for a story in the Riverfront Times. My search was guided by the official police report from the day, March 30th, 2017, and the report included an interview with an employee at the Star Packing Slaughterhouse, where the cattle had been waiting to be killed and turned into beef. But that didn't happen. Instead, the worker claimed that a thunderstorm startled one of the steers in a holding pen. The steer kicked his way through an unlocked gate, and 5 more followed, triggering a dramatic chase through the streets of St. Louis. The police report also had the statement of one Buck Ford, who owned a tow lot 3 blocks from the slaughterhouse. He remembered the day well.
I don't know. I was working here on the lot, and then when I looked outside the gate, and I saw these, I don't know, it might have been 4 or 5 cows. They come down through that way, and they was trying to squeeze. I had my truck parked over there. They was trying to squeeze, like want to go through. Then they all started trying to go through there, and they messed up the side of my truck.
Buck had grown up around livestock, but it wasn't normal to see a bunch of cattle running through his yard in North St. Louis.
What? Cows running loose? That's what got me.
It wasn't just Buck. It felt like the entire city came together that day to stop and watch this great escape. I was riveted to my computer screen, flipping between Twitter and the helicopter live feed on Fox 2.
Workers are wrangling cattle in North St. Louis after a slaughterhouse escape. Fox in St. Louis tweeting in the last hour that a total of 6 cows were on the loose.
It ultimately took a combination of slaughterhouse workers, cops, and a SWAT team to capture the runaway steers. Before it was all over, the animals damaged 2 police cars, broke taillights, and even busted through a wrought iron fence. There's a moment from that day that's always stayed with me. It was caught on video, taken by St. Louis Post-Dispatch photojournalist David Carson. David was in a crowd of people watching one of the escapees, a ruddy red-colored steer who probably weighed nearly 1,000 pounds despite being only about a year old. The steer was in a face-off with 2 men who appear to be workers from the slaughterhouse. On the video, you can see the crowd separated from the action by a metal fence, and beyond it, the men position themselves in front of the steer, trying to corner him. Now, a cow's lifespan can be 20 years, so this 1,000-pound toddler who had barely started his life, here he was, fighting to stay alive just a little longer. And what I love about this moment is that when the crowd cheers, it's for the steer. They are on his side. They've even named him.
So what's his name?
Chico Suave. That's his last name. He's smooth. He earned his stripes, though. He's straight from
He need to go down in history. He earned his stripes. He need to go down in history. Let him stay alive. Let him stay alive. He need it.
Then Chico charges at the 2 officers, forcing them to scamper behind a tree. The crowd goes wild.
Chico!
This popularity didn't end after their capture. It grew into an unlikely coalition of animal rights groups, a former hockey star, and hundreds of people donating to multiple GoFundMe campaigns. Everyone was rooting for the St. Louis Six to live. And they did. It took a series of tense negotiations with the owner of the slaughterhouse, but just 4 days after the escape, a nonprofit California-based sanctuary called the Gentle Barn agreed to take charge of the St. Louis Six, paying the slaughterhouse $12,500 for their lives. But it didn't end there. Fans of the St. Louis Six wanted more for them, a home. And so another GoFundMe campaign was launched and in 3 weeks raised $400,000. At the time, the Gentle Barn already had sanctuaries in California and Tennessee. But its founders, Ellie Laks and Jay Weiner, made sure that this story would stay in Missouri. And to do that, they bought a 27-acre farm in Ditmer, Missouri, which opened as an official expansion of the Gentle Barn in late 2017. It wasn't just the St. Louis Six living here. Around 50 animals would eventually call the sanctuary home. I visited there myself. I toured its grounds, its visitor center, its barns. I met a gang of nervous chickens and a duck who was persistently trying to make friends with them. There was a shy donkey who allowed me to pet his muzzle and a pig who loved belly rubs. Each of them had a name and a volunteer ready to share their story. I also got to meet Chico. In the years after its founding, the Gentle Barn, Missouri lived up to the hopes of its supporters. It became a home not just to the St. Louis Six, but to pigs, chickens, goats, donkeys, and horses, animals who, in their own ways, had escaped death. Some had fallen out of transport trucks, been rescued from abuse, or simply abandoned by owners who no longer wanted to take care of them. But on October 25th, the Gentle Barn uploaded a video announcement to its Facebook page. It was from its founders, Ellie Laks and Jay Weiner. They announced that they were closing Missouri's Gentle Barn.
Every animal that comes through the doors of the Gentle Barn is met with a promise that we will love them, care for them, and provide for them for the rest of their lives. With the enormous amount of animals in our care, we must always be working strategically to make sure that they get everything that they need, while still serving the communities.
A precise reason for the closure wasn't spelled out. Ellie said that the California and Tennessee locations were thriving, and Jay said that they cared very deeply about the Missouri staff, volunteers, and visitors.
We're very proud of the work that we've done there over the past 8 years. We have been working hard to stay open there, but because of the pandemic, the weather, the economy, and diminished financial support, we have to follow through with this plan.
The delivery of this announcement, and Jay's vague list of reasons, staggered the Gentle Barn's Missouri volunteers. Some of them had spent years there working as docents and guides for public visitors. This place was a part of their lives.
Everyone was shocked, confused. No one really understood. I mean, there had been no sense, no notice, no warning that there were any problems like that would require them to shut down.
That's Joseph DeVault, a former volunteer of the Gentle Barn, Missouri. He first encountered the sanctuary as a visitor about 4 years ago.
I mean, I could go on for hours about each animal. They all came from just traumatic situations, all of them. And watching them kind of heal from that trauma was healing, and seeing like these cows, they have no reason to trust any human, any person. I mean, people who look just like me, were the ones to torture them. So the fact that they can kind of get past that and see us, and not only that, like especially as you got to know them, they would come up to you. They'd be excited to see you, and just knowing where they'd come from and where they are now was so healing. It was that everything will be okay with all the mess going on all over the world. Like these cows were, I mean, it was a sanctuary for all the people there as much as for them.
Joseph had grown up on a farm in Arkansas around cattle, and he says that the Gentle Barn couldn't have been more different. The sanctuary made sure visitors knew that it wasn't a petting zoo, and it also made sure that everyone who visited knew the story of the St. Louis Six. That was part of Joseph's experience as a volunteer. He says that he often found himself sharing the story of the escape as visitors waited to meet Chico and the other steers.
These guys are celebrities, so on a very busy day, you might get 20 people rush down to go see the cows. So part of my job was to filter people in one at a time, a few at a time, so they wouldn't get just surrounded by people.
Over the years, the St. Louis Six settled into their new lives as sanctuary celebrities. Chico was still their leader and the most popular with visitors, but another former volunteer, Ryan Harper, developed a strong connection with a different member of the St. Louis Six, a steer with a mix of white and ginger hair named Houdini.
I just spent more time with him because he was the cow that people not that people ignored him, but he wasn't as opening to the hugs or the cuddles. So I spent a little more time with him because he never got that on a regular basis. I made it a goal of mine to help him heal. I was also in the Marine Corps, so I knew about PTSD, and I always contributed what he had to PTSD. And I just kind of worked with him how I would work with Marines that I knew that had PTSD. And I acknowledged what he was going through, and I always respected that. But at the same time, the more I got to know him, I could understand him a little more. And he got to the point where you could kiss his nose, you could hug his face, and he really did come a long way.
It wasn't all cow hugs and face kisses. Volunteers cleaned the pens and managed a workload of feeding and watching the animals. But volunteers like Ryan Harper tell me that it was a labor of love. Ryan spent 5 years in that role, forged by his connection to Houdini and the other animals. There were few warning signs that something was wrong, but Ryan and the others point to a particular decision as a major turning point, moving the Gentle Barn's 2 horses and 2 donkeys to the sanctuary's location in California.
They gave no honestly believable reason. They just said they were going to be taken care of better there. And we were all heartbroken because those donkeys were bought in an auction by a family, and the family brought them to us in Missouri. When I started volunteering, they were the newest residents there, and it took over a year for them to truly open up to people. And they had found their people, and they were literally just ripped away.
Ryan wasn't directly affected by this change. He wasn't responsible for their care, but he couldn't make sense of it. Like him and Houdini, these were volunteers who had spent a lot of time earning the trust of these donkeys and horses, and now they were being told to just visit them in California?
Just buy a plane ticket, get an Airbnb, not a big deal. Not even like I'll send you a picture update. I'll send you videos. Just come to California. I thought that was weird, but in my head, I was like, but at least they're not taking Houdini.
At least, not yet. Because while the volunteers and staff focused on the animals, most were still totally unaware that their time with them was coming to a close.
We need to take a quick break, but when we come back, we'll continue following St. Louis on the Air producer Danny Wicentowski's investigation into the closure of the Gentle Barn, Missouri late last year. And we'll hear reactions to the recent deaths of 5 animals transported out of Missouri to Tennessee. This is St. Louis on the Air on St. Louis Public Radio.
The Gateway brings you the day's news each weekday from around the St. Louis region and the state capitals in Jefferson City.
Our schools are accredited. We don't need this bill.
And Springfield.
How many more years must pass before lawmakers see time is of the essence?
I'm Abby Larico. Join me each weekday for The Gateway on the STLPR app or wherever you get podcasts.
Welcome back. I'm Elaine Cha. Let's continue listening back to our show's investigation of the Gentle Barn Animal Sanctuary, which closed in October 2024. This conversation first aired in March of this year. Before the break, St. Louis on the Air producer Danny Wicentowski introduced us to some of the sanctuary's former volunteers and how they had forged deep connections with people and animals at the sanctuary. Here's Danny.
In 2017, 6 steers ran through the streets of St. Louis. The slaughterhouse escape of the St. Louis Six became one of those moments, something that captures attention and inspires activism. It eventually led a nonprofit called the Gentle Barn to create a sanctuary for them in Dittmer, Missouri. 5 members of the St. Louis Six lived there, until it closed abruptly last October. I've spent the last 2 months talking to more than a dozen people connected to the Gentle Barn, Missouri, former volunteers and staff who experienced those final days when the tension was impossible to ignore. I wanted to understand what had happened here and why the story of a sanctuary inspired by the St. Louis Six could change so drastically and so quickly. Some of my sources had been involved in animal rights long before becoming a part of the Gentle Barn's mission, but everyone I spoke with conveyed that the Gentle Barn had, in some way, become a personal sanctuary. According to them, the Gentle Barn just did not appear to be on the brink of collapse in October 2024. There had been a rough stretch of illness and injury among the staff, putting more pressure on the other employees, but Craig Forster, a tour guide, says that it was nothing that seemed to endanger the existence of the sanctuary itself. Like others I spoke to, Craig says that everything changed just 1 week before the sanctuary's surprise closure, with the decision to move its 2 horses and 2 donkeys to California.
Everybody there, all the staff and all the volunteers, were doing everything they could to give the best possible life to these animals. They were very well cared for and very, very loved. So it was very wrenching for us to be told that some of these animals were going to be taken away.
The order had come from the Gentle Barn's California-based founders, Ellie Laks and Jay Weiner. According to Craig Forster and accounts from people with knowledge of the situation, that decision triggered serious pushback.
The location manager pushed back very hard, said this was absolutely the wrong thing to do, both for the location and for the animals, and for all the people involved as well.
Now, Craig's phone line isn't the clearest, but he goes on to tell me that the objections from the location's manager, Christine Sechrist, eventually led her to resign. This was the second major resignation following Liz Wiley, the sanctuary's animal treatment specialist. Both Liz and Christine declined to comment for this story, but they did tell me that they had signed non-disclosure agreements with the Gentle Barn. In any case, their departures signaled to the remaining volunteers that something was happening behind the scenes. On October 25th, a truck arrived to pick up the horses and donkeys. Later that same day, Ellie and Jay publicly announced the closing of Missouri's Gentle Barn, and just days after that, 26 animals made the 350-mile journey to the sanctuary's location in Christiana, Tennessee, about an hour's drive from Nashville. In the 4 months since, I've learned that 5 of the sanctuary's former Missouri residents have died, all in Tennessee. That includes Eddie, one of the St. Louis Six. Eddie had escaped slaughter, police, SWAT teams, only to die many miles from the city and people he helped inspire. Craig Forster knew Eddie well.
Everyone who worked with him and volunteered with him just viewed him as such a calming, joyful presence, because he was he would come up to ask for attention. He was one that would just amble into the middle of a group of people and ask for someone to give him butt scratches, or he'd just be calmly sitting there chewing the cud, and he'd just let you curl up against him, just when someone needs that moment of peace away from the rest of the world. And he was a real gentleman. He was gentle with everybody.
It's true that there were other deaths of rescued farm animals at Missouri's Gentle Barn. That's not unusual over a period of 8 years, and especially involving animals who had been bred and raised for food production, who were never meant to get older and larger. Eddie weighed about 2,000 pounds before his death after an injury at the Tennessee sanctuary, and in a January 21st Facebook post, the Gentle Barn said he injured his spine while innocently playing with his brothers, and it added that a veterinarian had, quote, helped Eddie out of his body.
Rescued animals in sanctuaries, they've been through a lot, and, sometimes they pass. Obviously they do. It's the nature of that work. It's the nature of caring for those animals.
It's a hard truth of animal rescue, but it hasn't made processing Eddie's death any easier for the people who once cared for him and the other animals in Missouri.
That's hit the volunteers and the former staff. They're very, very hard, because we don't believe it would have happened if those animals were still here. We believe that we were looking after them in the best possible way that we could.
Eddie's death is just the most recent one that's hit the former residents of the Missouri sanctuary. The deaths started only days after the animals were moved to Tennessee, first with a pig named Penny. Then it was Nigel, the rooster, and a chicken named Opal. And then a turkey named Hope. Although cut off physically from the animals, word of these deaths spread quickly among the informal networks of the Gentle Barn's former volunteers and staff members.
Because we haven't actually been with those animals for months now, it just makes it harder, because on some level you feel responsibility, because you feel like we should have been there to look after them, but we had that opportunity taken away from us.
Only the news of Eddie's death was ever posted publicly on Facebook. The former volunteers who had given so much to Missouri Sanctuary tell me that they were given no notice. They resorted to combing through the in memoriam section on the Gentle Barn's website. Some had spent years with the Gentle Barn. They told me that the lack of communication from the sanctuary's founders was hurtful, but not entirely surprising. That tension came to the surface on the sanctuary's final public Sunday on October 27th, which saw a huge response to the imminent closing. The parking lot was full, the lines backed up, as more than 100 visitors said goodbye to the animals, something that the volunteers also wanted to do. Jay Weiner, Gentle Barn's co-founder, was there that day as well. According to multiple people who witnessed the interaction, after the visitors had finally gone home, Jay attempted to address the volunteers. One person present, volunteer Brandy Cross, was hoping Jay would finally explain what was happening and why. But she says that didn't happen.
We wanted to know. We wanted to know answers to our questions about why this was closing so abruptly, and why wasn't there transparency. And Jay said that it was an employment issue and it was confidential and he couldn't tell us. And he repeated that several times. But there was a lot of tears, there was a lot of anger.
The anger is still there, but there's also fear. Most of the people I spoke with who were once connected to the Gentle Barn, Missouri, said they could not comment on the record, fearing they would be banned from visiting the animals they still care about in Tennessee and California. And now cut off from the Gentle Barn, its former volunteers in Missouri have a lot of questions about the treatment of the animals who died after their transport to Tennessee. Many say they feel abandoned by the sanctuary and its founders.
We're angry that we don't feel there's adequate staff in Tennessee to handle this many animals coming down there at the last minute. And I'm not finding any fault in anybody from Tennessee. I'm finding fault in the founders that this should have been planned better and with more care and concern for the safety of the animals. And it just wasn't. And so we just keep every day, we check the website, we keep hoping and praying there's not another one of our animals on it that has passed away.
The emotions around the end of Missouri's Gentle Barn are still running high. On one hand, this place touched hundreds and probably thousands of lives over the last 8 years, giving animals a place to find healing, peace, and giving people a way to find those things too. Ryan Harper said he saw it happen again and again, people arriving at the Gentle Barn as curious tourists and leaving changed.
We had some people come that would tell us they never ate pork again because they met Rosie or Petunia. And that never would have happened. And it's not about changing everybody to what you believe in, but if you can make a dent of change in a positive way, no matter what it is, you're doing something right.
What still doesn't make sense to Ryan and the other volunteers is why those same people were not given a chance to save the sanctuary, to keep the Gentle Barn in Missouri. Former tour guide Craig Forster puts it like this.
If they thought there was a problem coming, why not tell us that? Why not speak to the people involved and see if we can help? Because everyone here knows people, everyone works for different companies, everyone could try. The people of St. Louis raised money to rescue those animals in the first place. Why not give those people the chance to see if they can save that location too? But it was just batted away.
Over these past months of reporting, everyone I spoke to had their own unique story for what connected them with the Gentle Barn. But everyone talked about the St. Louis Six, about their individual personalities, how watching them escape, survive, and heal showed them that those things were possible. Joseph DeVault, a former volunteer, said that every time he told visitors the story of the St. Louis Six, how Chico and the others refused to give up, he could see a recognition of something profound.
You can see how even a little cow that shouldn't be there, that no one should even know about it, he broke out and changed the world in such a big way for so many different animals, for the community, all started by Chico. I think any of the people who ever met Chico would agree with me. He kind of has an aura of just strength, but he's really calm, or if you'll excuse the pun, gentle. He 1,000-pound, 3,000-pound animal, but he's so calm, but he knows what he did, and he'd do it again.
For Joseph and the others left behind by the Gentle Barn's departure, that's the tragedy of the way this sanctuary closed. Because St. Louis had already stepped up once to give Chico and the St. Louis Six a home in Missouri. We just never got a chance to do it again. The next chapter of the Gentle Barn story is not in Missouri. But what it left here, what Chico and the St. Louis Six showed St. Louis about itself, about freedom and risk and triumph, that's something that can never be taken away.
That was Danny Wicentowski. Coming up, I'll talk with Danny about his investigation and what he's learned about the circumstances of the deaths of 5 former residents of Missouri's Gentle Barn. This is St. Louis on the Air on St. Louis Public Radio.
If you have a smart speaker, you have access to the entire world of NPR and St. Louis Public Radio. All the latest news and all the captivating stories. Activate our voices with yours by telling your smart speaker to play St. Louis Public Radio.
Welcome back. I'm Elaine Cha. Today we're listening to an investigation into the abrupt closure of Missouri's Gentle Barn Animal Sanctuary in October 2024. This show originally aired in March of this year. Before the break, we heard producer Danny Wicentowski describe his reporting into what happened before the sanctuary's closing. I then sat down with Danny to talk about his findings and the Gentle Barn's founders Jay Weiner and Ellie Laks. I began by asking Danny to address the central question of this case. Why did the Gentle Barn close?
We really don't have a clear sense. And part of that, As in the announcement that Jay Weiner and Ellie Laks made, they referenced things like the pandemic, weather, diminished financial contributions, but it's just not clear why this had to take place in October and seemingly really over a matter of maybe just something like weeks of where this went from people feeling that the Gentle Barn in Missouri was getting visitors and in a good place to suddenly seeing these animals departing and the entire thing closing down in a matter of days.
Mm-hmm. This is not your first story about the Gentle Barn. In 2019, you put together an oral history of the escape of the St. Louis Six, and that was for the Riverfront Times. And you were actually a guest on this show to talk about that story. The Gentle Barn's co-founder, Ellie Laks, described the overall mission of the sanctuary.
The Gentle Barn is home to animals rescued from severe abuse or neglect. We bring them in, we rehabilitate them with vet care and a whole slew of alternative methods. Once healed, if we can find a home of their own, great, in a timely manner. If not, we give them sanctuary with us for the rest of their lives. And when they're ready, we partner with them to host groups of at-risk inner-city special needs kids, as well as school groups and private tours, to help people recover from their own stories and to connect children with the love of nature and animals.
Now, in that 2019 interview, Ellie Laks was also asked how the Gentle Barn keeps itself running.
By the generosity of the community, actually. There's so many people in the community that love animals and wish that they could help more or do more or have more animals, but it's not in their wherewithal. So for them to partner with us, fund us so that we can do the work, they get to feel like they're saving animals and doing good in the world while we're feeding, cleaning, and taking care of the animals that they're funding. So it's a wonderful partnership.
So Danny, as we just heard, there was a lot of community support for this sanctuary. Was there an effort to engage that community to get their help in keeping the Gentle Barn in Missouri?
It just doesn't seem that that's the case. I am subscribed to all of their marketing emails. I get their text messages. There was no emergency alert. There was no GoFundMe. There was no campaign to keep the Gentle Barn in Missouri. In fact, really the only version of this fundraising was the day of that announcement, October 25th, was actually to raise $75,000 to transport the animals out of Missouri. And that is again, why there was so much shock and confusion from people who felt that they were part of a really deep base of support for this place.
Mm-hmm. Now, through your reporting, Danny, you were able to confirm that 5 animals have died at the Gentle Barn's Tennessee location, and all had been transported there from Missouri in October. What is it that we know about the circumstances of those deaths?
So I want to be clear, we don't know exactly how some of these animals died. We have the descriptions that the Gentle Barn has provided on their website, their in memoriam section. But again, these were not publicly announced as, in terms of the deaths of these Missouri animals. It was only Eddie, the member of the St. Louis Six, who sort of had a special announcement and a recognition of where he had come from. But these deaths really occurred quite quickly. There was a pig named Penny. There were a couple of chickens that died. There was a turkey, and the descriptions don't really tell us a whole lot. Opal, the chicken, was described as being part of a group that was dying off of old age, and she was the last to pass. Nigel, the rooster, was described as passing away suddenly for reasons we still don't understand, which again just raises questions of why these circumstances aren't really spelled out. And again, why the volunteers in Missouri who knew these animals, they didn't get any notice, and they had to rely on their own sort of rumor mill and combing through this website just to understand who was alive and who was dead.
Mm-hmm. And speaking of volunteers, one of the people you spoke with was Donna McCall. Donna spent years as a volunteer at the Gentle Barn, Missouri, and her role there was as a docent for Penny the pig, whom you just mentioned. Penny was the first of the Missouri animals to die in Tennessee. Now, Donna met Penny about 6 years ago, and at that time, Penny was just a few months old. She had fallen out of a transport truck and rescued and brought to the Gentle Barn.
Of the 4 pigs, Penny was our easygoing pig. I mean, she was not the typical pig. It's normal for most of the pigs to have moments where they just have had enough and they're going to get up and have a fit. They're going to maybe bite another pig just because they're mad at them. And Penny, I described her like a bit of a hippie because she was more about sunshine and daydreams. and wanted to get along with others. She was like that from the beginning. So she represented not only a very pleasant and easy pig to have to teach people with because she was so patient and let me do it, but she also represented one who was rescued out of a horrible situation to be at such a young age that she managed to live a life where she was given love by all the visitors. She had me and other volunteers who adored her, and we respected her.
That was Donna McCall, a former volunteer with Missouri's Gentle Barn, reflecting on the life of Penny the pig. Penny died days after being moved from Missouri to Tennessee in October. Danny, what questions remain about the deaths of these animals?
Really, a lot of the basics. And part of it, the volunteers, of course, in Missouri are wondering, would these animals still be alive if they had stayed in Missouri? This was a long journey. I've heard different accounts of how this journey put pressure and physical pressure on these animals. Could something have happened? Could that stress have inflamed kind of their own medical conditions? These are animals, again, that have health problems because they were genetically bred and designed in ways to have very large bodies. Are their organs okay? And these things just do happen. The Tennessee Gentle Barn had also around the same number of animals, so they doubled their population in a way. I've heard only good things about that staff in Tennessee from those in Missouri. But part of what I did find in my reporting, I obtained a document, the standard operating procedure document for animal care at the Gentle Barn, Missouri. And what is really apparent there is that the person who is at the top of this decision tree for animal care is Ellie Laks, the co-founder. There was an animal care specialist at the Missouri Gentle Barn. In my reporting, I found out that she had resigned in the couple weeks before the closure. But this document references Ellie Laks many, many times. It says, if animals are losing weight, you need to tell her. If there's a change in a diet, it's Ellie Laks who makes that decision. They have other animal care specialists. There are those who are vet techs, and she is not a veterinarian. She is not a physician. She is the one making these decisions, and that also is the case when it comes to euthanasia. The section on euthanasia references Ellie Laks's claim that she is able to communicate with animals, and that is unusual to see in this kind of document, but it is unambiguous in its directive. It does say that we utilize veterinary care, getting second opinions, when animals are in this place, but it says we use acupuncture, massage therapy, chiropractic care, nutritional supplements, holding energy healing, and animal communication. And that piece is elaborated when an animal reaches this point of euthanasia. It says to call Ellie so she can communicate with the animals.
So communication with the animals, even though she is not physically with them?
That is also one of the pieces. Ellie Laks and Jay Weiner are based in California. They spent most of their time not in the Missouri Gentle Barn, and she does not have to be there for this procedure. It is actually something similar to her side business where she actually offers animal communication. She claims to be able to talk with your animal through a video call and is also able to communicate with an animal that is dead or an animal that is missing. This is not an evaluation of an animal's condition. She claims to have a very sincere and specific ability to determine what an animal wants, down to conveying its thoughts in sentences in English.
We're spending today's show looking at the surprise closure of Missouri's Gentle Barn in October 2024. The sanctuary's creation was inspired by 6 steers who escaped a slaughterhouse in St. Louis. I'm speaking with St. Louis on the Air producer Danny Wicentowski, who's been investigating the causes of Gentle Barn's closure and the deaths of 5 animals that once called Missouri home. I'd like to introduce another voice to this conversation. Adam Brewer is an animal activist in St. Louis and helped raise the money that went to pay for the lives of the St. Louis 6. Adam, welcome to St. Louis on the Air.
Hey, thank you for having me.
So, Adam, you were part of this story from the very beginning, saving the lives of these 6 steers in 2017. Now, 8 years out, were you expecting the Gentle Barn to end things the way that it did?
Yeah, unfortunately, I would say that this was kind of the expected outcome. Things were just sort of self-sabotaged from the beginning as far as where they set up the location, just the lack of close proximity to the city, making volunteers drive as far as they did, things like that. It just didn't seem like it would be sustainable. So actually, I was surprised that it even lasted as long as it did.
Mm-hmm. Danny?
So when it comes down to money, that is a big part of this question of why the Gentle Barn closed. We should remember that the St. Louis community raised over $400,000 in 2017 to make the Gentle Barn exist. And in my research, I looked at the tax forms filed by the Gentle Barn for 2023. They reported about $3 million in contributions, with another $1.7 million for their visitor program and merchandise. That's additional revenue. This is not a small operation. Jay and Ellie are each paid about $150,000 a year in salary. And then at the closure of the Gentle Barn, they sold the property there in Dittmer. That farm sold for about $600,000. That's about $200,000 more than what they purchased it for in 2017.
So ultimately what we're talking about is what happened with the animals. Adam, when you first heard about the deaths of these animals, what was your reaction? What was going through your mind?
Yeah, it was disheartening to hear. And I think what's important for people to realize listening is, yes, tens of millions and hundreds of millions of these animals are killed every year in the food system. But for these specific animals, they were at no risk of that. They were living their lives normally. And to the volunteers and people that had sacrificed years and hours of their life bonding with these specific animals, it was like losing a family member. It was like losing a pet. So it was a double-edged sword to feel, heartbroken not only for the animals that have since passed, but for the volunteers that had, their friends and family, pets, however they view it, stripped away from them.
So, Adam, the closure of Gentle Barn, this is now a done thing. There is no more Gentle Barn in Missouri. But for you and maybe some of the other volunteers who got close to these animals, what is it that you would like to see in the future?
Yeah, I think locally as a community, the people did a great job rallying around this place, and there was a lot of things that could have been done differently. It was viewed as more of a petting zoo than a sanctuary per se, but everybody held on to the hope that this property at some point could be transformed into an actual sanctuary. And now that it's been sold, the animals have left town, you have a lot of people that have a desire to see something come of this. They have the desire to have a place for animals to go, an actual safe sanctuary ran by people with a like-minded mission of, supporting the movement that they're involved with, and that being animal rights. So hopefully out of this, everybody can continue to discuss a possible sanctuary in the future. Corporate sponsors, I don't want them who were I don't want anybody to be dissuaded. St. Louis didn't fail the Gentle Barn, I should say. The Gentle Barn failed St. Louis, and I do think that we are more than adequately prepared, I should say, to have a sanctuary here and to have a place that this vision of over 8 years now has seem to exist. So making that vision a reality, I think that, again, for anybody that was donating, whether financially or, going and working on the property, should continue to work, continue to network. And I think that down the line, there can be something like that to exist if just the right people come together and, make it happen.
I've been talking with St. Louis on the Air producer Danny Wicentowski and with Adam Brewer, an animal rights activist in St. Louis who was part of the effort that saved the lives of the St. Louis Six in 2017. Adam, thanks so much for spending some time with us.
Hey, thanks for inviting me on. I appreciate it.
Danny, you've been working on this story for weeks now, and finally, just yesterday, you had a chance to talk with Gentle Barn co-founder Ellie Laks. Now, we heard a bit earlier some of her comments from the time she was a guest on this show in 2019, and during that interview, Laks talked about the generous community support that made Gentle Barn possible. But what did she say to you, Danny, yesterday about financial support for the animal sanctuary?
I did ask Ellie about whether there had been any emergency fundraising efforts. She really did acknowledge how much effort and feeling the St. Louis community and those had done to support the Gentle Barn. She did not give any specifics of what those efforts were, perhaps to save the Gentle Barn or keep it in Missouri, but she was clear that there was financial problems.
We had struggled with the financial capabilities of the organization for a while, trying to hold on to it, trying to resuscitate it, trying to bring in more revenue, more donations. It just came down to, with the help of the board and our team, saying, "Look, we can't sustain this financially anymore." And we didn't want to hold on to 3 locations and have the entire organization go under. Letting go of one of the locations, as painful as it may be, gave the organization an ability to be stronger and be able to care for our 200 animals.
So, Danny, you also asked Ellie Laks about the deaths of 5 animals who were moved away from the Missouri Gentle Barn after its closure to Gentle Barn outposts in Tennessee and California, right?
Yeah, and Ellie did, again, acknowledge of how much emotion was around these animals and that there were people who cared about them and are grieving for them. She did, though, maintain that the deaths of farm animals in sanctuaries like this, it is tragic, but it is expected.
We know with every single animal that we bring into the Gentle Barn, we are looking at a lifetime of trying everything we possibly can to allow that animal to have the most comfort and the most wonderful life they possibly can. And it's sometimes easy and it's sometimes very, very difficult. And sometimes we do have losses that are unpreventable, but nonetheless very sad.
So, Danny, you also asked Ellie Laks about her professed ability to communicate with animals. How does she respond to that?
She did clarify and maintain that veterinary care, they are the lead kind of decision makers when it comes to an animal's health or a euthanasia decision, which is what I asked her about, the death of Eddie, one of the members of the St. Louis Six, who was described by the Gentle Barn as injuring his spine and then being helped out of his body. That is a euphemism for that very difficult euthanasia decision. She acknowledged that animal communication, though, is part of this decision process.
The veterinarians lead our decisions. The state of the animal leads those decisions, and animal care is just there to support it. Sometimes I weigh in with animal communication if the animal has a specific request. We all work together as a team to care for these animals.
That's Ellie Laks talking about ways Gentle Barn makes its animal care decisions. Does that match the standard operating procedure document that you obtained, Danny?
It broadly does, but I really should point out that, this decision around euthanasia, it is really specifically identified as something that Ellie makes the call on. She is described as confirming with the animal what it wants to do using this animal communication. The document does list veterinary care and some of these other aspects, but it is just notable that the buck stops really with Ellie on this decision. She told me, of course, that the veterinarians lead this process. I have heard, though, concerns from former volunteers and staff about the direct kind of input that Ellie has on these decisions, and again, involving often Ellie evaluating these animals remotely through a video or a camera, and that is her animal communication through that avenue. That is very different, I think, than what most folks think about veterinary care.
Danny, you've spent now a lot of time on this story. What questions do you still have, or what is it that you'll be looking for next?
I think a lot about the what-ifs of this story, and that's really what a lot of the heartbreak that the volunteers and staff who formerly worked there have told me. What if there was a campaign to save this place? What if we had known how bad things were months in advance? What if we had been part of these discussions? Could we have raised this money? Could we have stabilized things? Ellie Laks really seemed to indicate that was never on the table and that just wasn't possible. But a lot of the things that I do think about, especially as I and others are wondering, will there be more animal deaths in Tennessee? Will things settle down in terms of how those animals are doing? I think a lot of folks are still thinking about how special this place was. I got to visit there, and be around these animals. It is very unique. It is something that doesn't really exist in many parts of the country. And this was a place that had so much feeling and emotion from St. Louis and its supporters and the St. Louis Six that I think people are still wrestling over what this loss means and what they had while it existed.
Danny Wicentowski is a producer for St. Louis on the Air. Thanks for being here and talking with us.
Great to be here as always.
This show was originally broadcast in March. It was produced and written by Danny Wicentowski and edited by Alex Hoyer, with additional editing support from Emily Woodbury. Greg Montanew did much of the audio editing and mixing, with engineering support from Aaron Dorr.
Our executive producer is Alex Hoyer.
St. Louis on the Air is a production of St. Louis Public Radio. Understanding starts here.
Do you find yourself regularly listening to episodes of St. Louis on the Air? Suggest us to a friend you think might enjoy our conversations, and leave us a review and rating on Apple Podcasts on the App Store. It's the simplest way to help people discover our show. Thank you.
St. Louis Public Radio is a member-supported service of the University of Missouri St. Louis.